Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, December 20th. Starting perhaps a little bit earlier than normal today. Kind of just woke up early and decided that it was either going to be a situation of sitting around and doing nothing or just going ahead and streaming, and we can get away with that in particular since it is so close to the New Year's and Christmas, because there really is just not that much going on. Apparently the Duels Cup rankings announcements, you can confirm your rankings. In addition to tallying the rankings, they also investigated possible cheating in the Duelist Cup. We would also inform you, based on the results of our investigations, players who were found to be maliciously violating the rules have been removed from the rankings. Furthermore, we have banned the accounts that maliciously breached the terms of use. So I don't know what the process even really would be to cheat per se in this game specifically, other than just your generic smurfing, having accounts designed to lose to raise up the odds of other accounts winning, or perhaps code injection mods or something like that. Or I mean, I don't even know if a overlay app, according to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel's terms, is considered cheating, something that would just give you perfect recollection of percentages and odds. And then a tryout duel is coming, Extreme 1 to 30 seconds. The time limit for this duel is only 30 seconds. Build a duel tailored for speedy deployment and aim to get some rewards. Interesting. And this is starting the 21st to the 25th. And that is an extreme idea, certainly. And then there's another duel called Extreme Duel 2. Both sides only have 24 life points, which would speed up the game too. Then a rental competition 7, a dragon type only, which pretty obviously is just make decks with dragon type monsters only. The idea of having extreme events is an intriguing idea, because one of the main complaints I've had about most trading card games, but this one certainly is no exception, is the fact that there has just been far too... Do we have any of these? No. Like, far too many events that just end up taking up more time overall and really aren't doing anything special outside of taking up more time and distracting from ranked play, which really should be the default focus from that point, or always, really. Like, inherently there is about 10 days and I just made it to, I believe, platinum level, and it would be interesting to spend the extra energy to try and get to diamond level. I got 3 new normal cards here, opening 10 packs, and otherwise it's still Master Duel cards, though, of the selection of cards that aren't really that relevant. And then we're just dealing with traditional daily quests today, and let's just see if maybe we can get another duel live to come in or show up. Now, as far as my ranking in the Duels Cup, it's going to be nothing, because I only made it to level 14 or level 13 on the first stage, so there's really nothing more for them to hand out. And yeah, we're still trying to figure out some way to fusion summon monsters when there really is just no deck in existence that I could build and would be willing to play while fusion summoning at the moment. Like, I basically would need to take this current rank, Platinum 5, up to at least Platinum 4, give myself a little bit of a buffer, then build a deck with polymerization in it, so I could fusion summon characters and then do that the number of times, the 3 times I need to do it, and then hopefully not fall back down to rank 5 in that process before I start going back to my good old staple of Zodiac Tri-Brigade. Definitely feels like there were sound effects that were in that screen before and they've kind of gotten rid of them. But if that isn't the case, it definitely feels like there should be sound effects there. Yeah, going completely silent in a game while your screen is loading is a mistake. Particularly when there's big flashing visuals happening. For every big flashing visual action, anything with movement, anything that has emphasis, there should be a sound effect associated with it. And this game is hardly brand new. It's well over 2 years old, so there's really no justification for that not being there. Feels like cut corners. For the accountability section, that can be a short sentence. I basically did nothing. Over the weekend, it broke my habit of focusing in on the programming, and I have just continued that broken habit, and so I've accomplished nothing whatsoever on the smart air sign. Haven't even worked on it. Otherwise, I have just been playing Memento Mori and the Tinkafuma and 7 Mortal Sins on my phone. At this point, Lower Decks still is being played until the next expansion happens, and then at that point I probably will completely lose interest in the game, because I'll just catch up with the new episode, and then there will be nothing to do for months on end, potentially, until the next new episode comes out. So, yeah, I'm very close. Just in a waiting pattern to eventually be completely done with that, with Star Trek Lower Decks. Tinkafuma, as an adult game, is actually giving the most amount of Christmas-themed content to play that I'm actually playing. 7 Mortal Sins has a ton of content, but none of it really feels special. It's too much content, so nothing stands out, really. And then Memento Mori is fairly minimal in what it's adding overall. It's cycling out one of the small characters. That there's a fairly small collection of those characters, and it seems like it's going to have more of a New Year event, if anything. Of course, speaking of events, while the Steam Winter Sale has been promised, it really does not feel like it's coming until basically Christmas. Not that it has to come before Christmas. At this point, it could definitely, it would be more focusing on people who got Steam cards and spent Steam cards from their Christmas presents to buy games later. I wouldn't be surprised if there's kind of a lot going on in the background as far as store cards and gift cards, and there is potentially a push to get rid of a lot of store cards, particularly if, say, Best Buy or some other company is going to not hold store cards anymore for Steam or other stores anyways. I could also see it being a case where they want to update the security on store cards, because there's been a lot of that happening also, where people are running scams with gift cards. And so if there is a new technology, a new standard that they want to implement, but they need to get rid of all the old cards first, that could be a focus too. But yeah, it does just kind of feel like this year in particular Steam has decided to put a sale rather late. Maybe that is even coming down to a thought that they had kind of a short supply of OLEDs and they were anticipating maybe the Steam Decks to be higher in demand and couldn't fulfill that demand. Maybe it's just because they're trying to avoid sales overall. I mean, it could be anything as crazy as even Valve made too much money, and as such, they don't want a massive extra sale this year in fear that there won't be as big of a sale next year. I'm just gonna go ahead and try this. So I guess now if he succeeds, he'll potentially destroy 2 cards on the field. Player with the lowest life points takes no damage. Interesting. See how this all works. I'm also watching Sanctuary, an old sci-fi show. The first 3 or 4 episodes of Sanctuary, like almost every single location is green screened, and it was a far too early experiment in doing something like that. Like, if you imagine just now Disney Plus, in 2022 basically, Disney Plus has succeeded at having a system where green screens, TV shows, serialized TV shows, work. They make sense just financially, and they visually look well. Well, Sanctuary probably came out 25 years ago on the Sci-Fi Channel. It was just way too early to attempt that. And eventually you get, after about the 4th or 5th episode, a couple of episodes where the actors are trapped on a plane that is an actual set, or they're otherwise trapped in a location. And once they get to that point, that gives them a little bit of a buffer of a couple weeks, I imagine, where they started to actually build sets. Of course, they screwed themselves over quite a bit by imagining the Sanctuary in Sanctuary to be this very nicely decorated mansion that is huge in some kind of nebulous giant Gotham City like environment. That the whole city is also huge, and frankly too dark. They probably were trying to have dark environments so that they could hide some of the flaws of their CG backgrounds. but it didn't really work. Generally, I just don't feel like the director of photography of Sanctuary at the beginning, and probably even going forward after the first few episodes, had the greatest of ideas. Even after they seemingly got rid of most of the CGI sets, there's still like transition scenes where it feels like there potentially should be a fade to black and then fade in from black from a transition from one to the other, and it's just a jump cut, and you just never use jump cuts in movies or TVs unless you're really trying to create a feeling of confusion. I think the whole concept probably was a little flawed around Sanctuary, and that's why it's one of the early sci-fi shows that really didn't catch on amongst several sci-fi channel shows that caught on and at least lasted longer because they didn't have anything better. The concept is that there's going to be what they call anomalies, what normal people would call crypto zoological or cryptids. It probably would be just called cryptids. So you have like the Bigfoot and mermaids and just all those monster type characters, and supposedly you're supposed to be a sanctuary for it, but most of the episodes you're fighting and shooting the cryptids instead of being really a sanctuary for them. So there's this big division between, there's anomalies or cryptids, let's just stick with cryptids, that are dangerous and you're putting in what they call the shoe, but it's effectively just a jail or a zoo. And then there's other cryptids that you're maybe helping a little bit, but you're still kind of imprisoning them in the sanctuary for their own good and just letting them wander around this castle. It took them too long to really establish that there might be a bad guy group of humans that might be trying to kidnap or use the cryptids, and that really should have been in the first episode, is that these cryptids are not safe because they're being hunted down by an evil organization, even if that evil organization changes from season to season. Sanctuary has Amanda Tapping and one of the guys from Stargate, the SG-1, the one that plays Daniel, I believe. But their roles and their acting is rough. They were younger at the time. You also kind of paint yourself in a corner by having cryptids, because after the third or fourth season, you're going to be on your third or fourth, like Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. And once they introduced the ideas that it would be cryptids and monsters, I think that was where they probably were thinking that they wanted to use CGI quite a bit for some of the cryptid monsters, and then perhaps that was where they were thinking that they should have the backgrounds be CGI so that the cryptid monsters and the backgrounds match in lighting and in view, which at a certain level, if you were going to do that, you'd have to have the entire scene be CGI and just have no humans on set at all for that shot. Which could work. I mean, the whole thing could be animated, and then you would have had that point. It could have, at the time, if I'm saying Sanctuary really came out 25 years ago, having a fully CGI adult show probably wouldn't have sold or worked, but yeah, you would have solved a lot of problems doing that. if that was the move. But yeah. So I've been wasting a lot of time watching that, and not really a ton of other TV. I turned my heater up because it's getting colder, and inevitably by turning up my heater, that just lulls me into a comfortable, warm, cozy bed, and I fall asleep more. So I honestly, even from my own biased opinion, would really question if a show like Sanctuary could work as a concept. I almost feel like it probably needs to be set in the future. That way it could be, there are a bunch of cryptids on Earth, but then there is also the possibility of aliens. And that could potentially open up the door to just anything and everything being considered something that needs sanctuary. I think you probably would want to balance out humans needing sanctuary also. Inherently, the name sanctuary does imply that you're being pursued or persecuted by somebody or something. So you need a strong bad guy or several strong bad guys to make sense. Sanctuary very quickly introduces the idea of these 5 people, including the lady who runs the sanctuary, being artificially mutated and having special powers, and as such it starts to focus in on that a little too much. All of these sci-fi shows, or at least a significant amount of them, I'd say Eureka is probably a standout example for one of the sci-fi shows that isn't like this, and certainly some of the other shows like Lost Girl, which is the one about the fairy succubus lady that I forgot the name of when I was talking about it a week or 2 ago. Like, a significant amount of the shows, however, are of the exact same concept and exact same model. Warehouse 13 is every episode you're going out and you're trying to deal with something that is unique and magical, and then you're trying to collect it and bring it back. Sanctuary, basically the exact same thing. Only difference is Warehouse 13 is items somewhat built around history. Sanctuary is cryptids based around more modern myth and rumor. There is a more recent show that's not on Sci-Fi that I've heard about that's really crazy, about people hunting cryptids. And even like Ghostbusters really is that same kind of idea, although the movies are kind of standalone. I did see that there's a new Ghostbusters that they've announced, so this might be a very interesting perspective from the outside looking in, since I haven't watched any of the Ghostbusters since the female reboot one. It'll be interesting to see if there is a path for movies to be set on the right path and continue and start to make sequels and start to make it work, because we've inherently run into that problem where almost all the actors in movies are too old to be the actors in sequels, but we do want more of the Marvel movie style serialized content, even though we're pretty burned out on Marvel movies, serialized Marvel movies themselves. So it is a possibility, and it would be very interesting if it turned out that we're about to see the beginning of a whole new generation of Ghostbuster movies, that Ghostbusters is just not going to mean the same thing, or mean that at least the same actors as it has meant for the past few decades. Which in the case of Ghostbusters, that makes a lot of sense. As for TV, there's pretty much no interest anymore in making any kind of TV. It is all on streaming services, and even on that, the most recent announcement of a streaming thing is a live-action One Piece series from Netflix. I'm personally just kind of desperately trying to think, when could I really justify like paying for just like 1 month of Netflix and watching everything and then cutting it off and just being in that pattern, which is pretty much the only financially reasonable way to engage in Netflix. And most other streaming services aren't even that much. Like, it is really ridiculous how broken up and all the streaming services have gone. And I'm very much in a holding pattern as far as just like Hulu. Once Disney completely takes over Hulu, what that would be like and what that would look like. Weirdly, there is just increasingly better options to watch things with the free ad-supported television options and watch older shows over again a second or third time than pay for premium services that now pretty much don't want to let you watch old stuff without commercials, and instead will only give you commercial-free environments at best for the new stuff, Amazon Prime being a perfect example of that. But also, Freevee and Amazon Prime, it's a pretty terrible selection, even though it's a very wide selection, because it's just not good quality. 99.9% of all TV and movies suck, and it's really a waste of time. At a certain point, I probably should just pull out my anime DVDs and watch an entire anime series without commercials, and at least then you'd get something different. And different really is the key word there. It's like I've had a long life of watching TV, and probably my generation will be the generation that has a very long life of watching TV. I didn't realize it was my turn. Where future generations will spend a lot more time watching streaming services or YouTube, Facebook, doing other things in general other than screen time type things. And as such, they aren't going to have decades and decades of old shows that they've already seen and that they already know are pretty awful. At a certain level, if I hadn't seen Sanctuary before and I was desperate, I would probably like it a lot more, but familiarity breeds a little bit more contempt, particularly when the show isn't great. Sanctuary, I believe, only went one season. One of the things I think that is a problem, and Sci-Fi really dropped the ball on not realizing this as far as their originals, is when you look at the original Star Trek series, or The Next Generation, or pretty much any of the other Star Trek super successful shows, or you look at The Twilight Zone, there is a unique pattern there in that there isn't as much of a pattern. Star Trek, the original series, it's not every episode you come up to an alien and you fight the alien and you defeat them with your phasers and photon torpedoes. Even if most episodes probably had some kind of conflict section in a longer narrative. The Twilight Zone is widely different from episode to episode as an anthology series. So, where the Sci-Fi Channel, in their boneheaded management, which obviously it's pretty obvious they had that, and probably still today even have that, where they came up with the idea that making a show like Warehouse 13, where every single episode plays out almost exactly the same, makes sense. I mean, sure, that might be very familiar and comforting to a small audience, but that's not really even the sci-fi audience. Like, sci-fi fans tend to want to be challenged more. And their major successes, like Battlestar Galactica, go in complete different directions from that. And still, they really didn't learn from that point. Totally just ran out of cards. You don't see that very often. It's not like I personally, in fairness, have great ideas for if I ran a TV station, if I ran all of TV. But I think I could. I definitely do feel like I could do it better. Do it better for the audience that I would want to attract. And there almost certainly would be financial compromises where you let sports, football, soccer, things like that still play when they play, because those did not get a lot of commercials sold. They bring in a different audience. But yeah, I would want to first of all just have a lot more diversity and a lot more variety. I suspect with the success of Baldur's Gate 3, we might see slightly more embracing of like your hardcore Dungeons and Dragons fantasy type stories, probably on streaming services, probably not on like ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox, not on the big four. I could see a show like that being on Sci-Fi. I could see a show like that being on a CW. I also question, with the success of Baldur's Gate 3, whether we won't slowly start to see perhaps a larger embracing of Japanese RPG games that are also in that fantasy style. I think that could make a lot of sense. Yeah, Sanctuary, if you compared it to a much later show that actually did air on ABC called Grimm, you definitely get a better concept in Grimm, since you have this police officer who's investigating murders as the initiating concept for every episode, and then you have these monsters, cryptids, that are running around and have their own kind of established societies and organizations and groups, and are perhaps fighting amongst each other, whereas there isn't that need to try and capture and bring in every single person. Yeah, if I was in charge of the big four TV stations, probably could only justify squeezing sci-fi shows still on Fridays. Just same old as it has always been. That the time slots where shows go to die in most cases. Maybe a major success could get like one 38-minute to an hour time slot on Thursdays. But actually it would be also incredibly boring, and I know I'm just rambling here and talking about basically nothing. It actually would be incredibly boneheaded and wrong mentally to assume that the best way to succeed as far as making a TV show or a serialized show of some sort is to actually put it on TV in the first place. You get a much bigger budget from something like Netflix and streaming, it seems at least, and also you get considerably more freedom if you just put it on YouTube yourself, even if maybe you have a lower chance of making a profit there. Although in all fairness, I have not seen very many people try to make highly polished content on YouTube and it then being purchased and or polished up or remade for any other medium. You have a few successes like Video Game High School, and that's about it. That may change at some point if TV completely died and there was only YouTube content creators. And really there's only like one content creator I know that took Rocket Jump and tried to turn it into a short movie production company. I don't think that worked particularly well either. At some point in the future, maybe with AI, things will become so democratized as far as creative making that people can make what would be today's TV level of quality, or even Netflix level of quality content easily. But even on that, I would say most YouTubers, myself included, really don't have great ideas. Like, you look at a Let's Player or a video game critic, and we're doing perhaps something you might have seen on G4 or the equivalent of Siskel and Ebert as far as being a video game critic. Which, yeah, that's really not that much. And then you have like a bridge series that take something that already exists and they make a comedic abridged version of that series, and that's a little creative, I'll give it, but that's really just Mystery Science Theater 3000. Even Mystery Science Theater is more about posting things, I think, on its YouTube channel now than it is really trying to be on Netflix. That is one of the reasons why I had such a large love for anime back in the day when I was a big anime fan, is that even then, when I was just a teenager, edgelord teenager perhaps, I had already been bored out of my mind for traditional medium and just Western entertainment. In anime, as crazy as it often is, at least gives you something different, something exciting. I think I've missed every single of the Epic Games. It's my turn, isn't it? Yeah, I think I'm probably done playing for today also. Yeah, I think I missed almost every single of the Epic Games free games. And yeah, at a certain level I kind of don't care either. But yeah, that kind of sucks that I wasn't on the ball. I'm still very much uninterested in Yu-Gi-Oh! And if I don't have any daily quest things to do in this, I should just move on. Seems like we may be getting some news finally rolling in for this Wednesday. But still not really a ton of news. And I'm not willing to just wait around for news. Yep. Is this guy gonna win? Or, I mean, he kind of could. He hit this, then smash this, 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 and this. He's got plenty of trap cards. The National Video Game Museum apparently was having a PlayStation 5 giveaway, and they picked a winner. And then they say stay tuned for giveaways and events in the future. And thanks for supporting the National Video Game Museum. There's a picture here of some kind of robot. I don't know if this is maybe a icon from the National Video Game Museum as far as a mascot. I've not seen any kind of mascot from the National Video Game Museum. This might just be from a specific character. I mean, this may be new. This all feels frankly a lot newer. Up until this point, the National Video Game Museum has been particularly poor at having events and having really anything to say at all. When it definitely could have more events on social media and just saying more things. I don't want it to become redundant and repetitive. But yeah, pretty much up until December 8th, they posted absolutely nothing between November 22nd and December 8th, and all they're posting is just a schedule saying they'll be closed for Thanksgiving on the 22nd. Then it's another 12 days earlier, November 10th, that they say they're giving out free admission to active military and veterans. And it's just like, there really should be more posts about things they have in their collection every now and then, at least one a month, and just general engagement things. Doesn't really need to be huge. And yes, there is certainly a question as far as how much does that kind of engagement really even help the National Video Game Museum. Either people hear about it or they don't. I guess what you're probably doing there is trying to just have enough engagement on a site like Twitter or other places, probably should be everywhere, is hope that maybe you'd go viral at some point, and by going a little bit viral, just trending a little bit, more people would know about the National Video Game Museum existing and have more of an interest in visiting it. Which, yeah, a web presence doesn't have to be huge, but it shouldn't be as minimal as it has been in the past, I suspect. I would suggest. And we pretty much don't have anything here to do. I could duel in solo mode, and that's it. I don't even have a duel live or a login, so that this will probably reset with the duel live and login at noon, but we'll probably be done with the stream by then. According to Gamatsu, Bloober Team is going to develop a new game based on a Skybound Entertainment intellectual property, which it's codenamed R. I think Bloober Team. I think Bloober Team is the ones that made the painting horror game, and then the sequel that nobody cared about or played, and then the remake of the painting horror game, and the DLC for the painting horror game was good, but I can't even remember the name of the painting horror game. And Skybound Entertainment, if I recall correctly, what would be the Toys to Life game, I think, but I could totally be wrong about all this. This is where Gamatsu would do better if they gave us a little bit more details in any way, just details about Bloober Team and Skybound Entertainment. There is just a very large number of video game companies out there and what they worked on in the past and history there. And keeping all of that straight in someone's head is a endeavor in itself. PlayStation Store has the biggest sale of the year, launching with over 4,500 discounts. One of the things about Steam is when its winter sale does kick in, you will get an end of the year page that I might show off in one stream when it happens, but I imagine it's not going to be all that exciting, particularly considering how the last 3 months of this year has all stopped production, and I've just been working on my Smart On Air sign until the past couple days, in which I'm just accomplishing nothing at that point. Gamatsu also says that PlayStation 5 sales have topped 50 million. 2023 marks the first holiday season since the launch that full supply is available. This also, I think, breaks down to the Xbox Series X potentially selling at a 3-to-1 ratio is what I think I saw. We saw seemed like the author of El Shaddai in Japanese tweeting a little bit about El Shaddai, and now we have a Gamatsu article to give us a little bit more details. El Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron HD Remaster for Switch launches April 28th, 2024. It'll be available physically and digitally in Japan. I don't think the game is any more popular in Japan than it is in the West. Like, I just don't think it is. It ever gained enough traction, had enough publication for it, and being based off of apocryphal religious Christian texts very loosely, I'm sure turned off a lot of people, and then not being very strict to the translation of the Book of Enoch, I'm sure turned off some people too. It does pose a big question. I have no idea who these characters are. haven't played this game in a very long time. It does pose a question, though, as far as just Jewish, specifically Old Testament focused fiction, why there isn't more of that. I imagine a lot of it comes down to the fact that there probably aren't a huge amount of Japanese game developers that are familiar with like Judeo-Jewish lore, and there aren't probably that many Jewish game developers. It would kind of make sense that there should be at least one out there. You'd think that particularly in like Israel there would be a Jewish video game company that makes something big enough, some indie company, but no, doesn't seem like there really is. That there probably is a game company or two in Israel, but yeah, I couldn't name any of them. I know there's some tech companies in Israel, definitely, but not particularly video game things, video game developers. And it really, El Shaddai highlights that weird situation in that you have to have this very niche Japanese developer telling a story or making a game based on this. Although in all fairness, if you get away from Jewish, like the Veggie Tales type entertainment also has not managed to come to video game form. There's no highly Christian focused video games either, with perhaps loosely you might argue something like Doom that has demons in it is extremely loosely based off of the mythos based off Christianity, but yeah, nothing really specific there either. And there is something special about the Japanese having no real reverence for religions that aren't part of their own culture, for the most part. Being willing to use religious stories to create a different experience, different story. But then El Shaddai also had some problems in that there were some entire sections that played with a very different game mechanic, and it wasn't that long of a game, and it was kind of a clunky game. And I would have hoped all of that might have been fixed in an HD remaster, but I suspect it's not been changed that much. Noticeably here, even though it is 87% positive and already on my wish list, there's only 254 reviews since this came out September 1st, 2021. So this really would be one of those games that, because I have knowledge of it and played it before, I could cover, and I might be the only person on YouTube to actually do a long play on it and cover it, and that might be somewhat unique. But then it also wouldn't come up high in the search rankings. There's also problems in that this game kind of ends on a cliffhanger. Interesting. You can get Japanese audio, it says. For a second there, I thought it might only be the dubbed English. Some of the gameplay mechanics around how it plays really would be more interesting if that had been copied more in other games. Having these little flying paper airplane weapons. Although, for the most part, I think a lot of that is just kind of a action cutscene, QTE type event versus actually directly controlling it. They say it's easy to play, hard to master. So maybe El Shaddai will come out on the Switch and gain a few more fans. It is willing to come out physically, which that does cross a line certainly to say, hey, I'm willing, the publisher is willing to make physical discs so they are hoping it sells a little bit more. Although they also are very late to the party, and so we still hope backward compatibility exists between the Switch and whatever the next Nintendo console is, but there's really not a 100% guarantee of that. Here is a Video Games Chronicle article that I thought I had seen. The PlayStation 5 outsold the Xbox Series X and S 3-1 in 2023, a research firm estimates. Sony's console saw a big jump in sales this year while Xbox and Switch sales declined. You would definitely have Microsoft making the argument that the reason for that is people had already bought the Xbox Series X or S, and they just didn't need another another Xbox. Whereas the PlayStation 5 has been in short supply this whole time, so now people are catching up. But it is really unattainable for the gaming community to just every 3 years end up buying a new console from a different company because they're trying to have them all. At some point, the money's going to run out and people are not going to be willing to buy whatever the Nintendo console is and an Xbox and a PlayStation. They're going to pick one as a loser and just skip at least a generation, if not skip that console forever. And the arguments are not great on either side as far as which one to skip. If you want Sony exclusives, you have to get a PlayStation. If you want Xbox Game Pass and generally just more of a selection and cheaper selections, you go with the Xbox Series X or even the S. There really aren't a huge amount of exclusives that are really great on the Xbox right now, but there is a future potential there, certainly, with all of Microsoft's acquisitions, that you would get a Elder Scrolls game that's exclusive to an Xbox or exclusive to Xbox and PC. There is also, on the other hand, a possibility with new management coming in for Sony Interactive Entertainment that the PlayStation just changes its focus drastically with the new management, and then we see even fewer PlayStation exclusives, which there really haven't been that many to start with. I still maintain that there's a small possibility that Sony just gives up on a console completely and just abandons the PlayStation brand just because they're not enthusiastic about running a PlayStation. Sony is still failing miserably compared to the Switch, particularly in Japan, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Japanese owners of Sony, the parent company Sony, really do just look at the PlayStation 5 as a failure for that reason alone. And I could see a world where Sony just tries to make games for the Nintendo Switch, or just tries to make mobile games instead, or just gets out of the video game industry altogether. Microsoft won't do that. They're too invested and too stubborn to do that. Platinum Games has the Bayonetta Origins, Ceres, and the Lost Dungeon original soundtrack out today in Japan. You can see it is a weird shot that they've made here because it looks like it is a 5-disc CD packaging designed to look like a book, but then the angles of the square book have been tilt shifted in the shot to kind of try and stretch it out, although perhaps not doing a great job there. The soundtrack is only for sale in Japan but ships worldwide with some online retailers. Anybody can listen to snippets of the game's beautiful soundtracks in this video. Apparently they also put out some sheet music for one of their songs. There having not played this Rydo game, I can't really speak to what the quality of the audio is, but they probably does say something in that they're promoting Rydo and the Lost Demon by its soundtrack instead of trying to promote it by it being like well reviewed. It didn't get any awards, it didn't get any major amount of praise. While it is nice to have games that have beautiful soundtracks, it also is it also is tending not to be a major focus by most game players. And then they're asking from the 22nd, which Platinum Games titles have you enjoyed the most? Let us know down below. And then they're showing several games here in the background that are hard to read. And then the Xbox 360 version of Bayonetta rated M for mature. And then Bayonetta for the Wii U rated 0D. And then Bayonetta 2 rated 0D for the Wii U. Which this is a pretty poor collection and random collection of games. It does point, though, to the they pan a little bit more. Star Fox Adventures. They're showing off the whole wall of their display. It definitely points, though, that at least at the moment they are focusing still heavily on Bayonetta, and that they're probably going to try and milk Bayonetta for as much money as possible. Astral Chain, Nier Automata. But yeah. And that may very well be where the director / creator of Bayonetta didn't want it to go. It's interesting, you have these little ribbons on a shirt, a miniature shirt, but I'm not sure what the ribbons mean per se, whether these are collectibles or whether these are some kind of award. If they were some kind of award, I would have to zoom in on it. I'd almost assume that they're like Platinum Award equivalents of what you would get in the game. And I can't really make anything out there. And so yeah, it could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing if they just continue to milk Bayonetta forever. Probably is going to be a bad thing. I typically try to ignore Open Critic, but they did this post, I guess. Let's see. We regret and apologize for this post. We have opinions on this. Our team came to the game development and we're completely outraged at these hacks, but we'll keep our opinions quiet going forward. We're sorry for the naive statement. And then the post is unavailable. So they're backtracking on some post that seems to have happened. And then follow up on that, for those pointing out the hypocritical coverage of Capcom leaks, we regret that coverage. We ceased publishing news and stories in 2021 because we felt like we could not put forward a robust and professional, fairly compensated effort. We're sorry to Capcom. So they're just like apologizing, and it certainly comes off as weak. Now it might be right, certainly, when somebody apologizes, but the problem is if you apologize, you kind of have to take ownership of what you said. So deleting the post is not really acceptable. Like, you kind of have to leave it up there if you're going to apologize it. If you're going to just be sneaky and delete things, that's fine too. but then you can't potentially virtue signal and try to get good boy points for apologizing on something. OpenCritic, trying to be a website that just congregates, that's probably the wrong word, other review sites' reviews, probably should have never even thought that they could be in the business of publishing news and stories and then giving up during the pandemic because they can't make enough money, or be professional enough, but really just because they couldn't make enough money. It's not like other video game news sites are particularly professional or robust. Plenty of sites are definitely not robust. But yeah, they really shouldn't have been in that business. If they were going to do that, you probably should have made something called Open News, and at that point you should have probably had that be a sister site that you could start up and shut down when necessary, if necessary. But yeah, even though OpenCritic does kind of make sense that it might have criticism, it doesn't really make that much sense to have news and stories. Like if they had done reviews and then congregated everybody else's reviews from every other site, that still would fall under the word critic. But yeah, I kind of wish I knew what the conversation was here, but let's see. They've seemingly deleted every single comment. There's that definitely is probably yeah, there's probably a problem there, certainly with the way Twitter is working nowadays, that you can just delete every comment and get rid of all criticism there. Both Metacritic and OpenCritic, though, have had these major problems as in an attempt to try and be relevant. Let's see if I've blocked off a bunch of stuff here, because there just really has been not a good reason to trust OpenCritic or Metacritic, because their first source of review scores all comes from mainstream video game journalism, who have their own problems as far as credibility goes. So, like, we could look at the 2023 Hall of Fame here, for instance, and this is OpenCritic's effectively Games of the Years, and you see it's Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate 3, Asgard's Wrath 2, Videoverse. I've never even heard of Videoverse. Against the Storm, probably haven't really heard of that. Resident Evil. Most of these also, just 4 of these games 92, like 2 games 91, 3 games are 90. Slay the Princess as a small indie game, or Jack Jian as a smaller Japanese game, getting 90. Really not in any way comparable to a major game like Spider-Man 2. It really is just apples to oranges as far as all of that goes. And then what makes a game popular is questionable. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora here, 71. Somehow popular, probably just because it's been released relatively recently. And then featured deals. I guess they're games that are on sale somewhere, because they're trying to have affiliate links on Amazon to make some money. And there probably was an ad that would have popped up there. The real question and you have to really scroll down quite a bit to start seeing news, which they said they stopped doing news. This article is from 2023. That doesn't feel like they stopped news. Let's just go back and reread this. We ceased publishing news and stories in 2021 because we felt like we could not put forward a robust, professional, and fairly compensated effort. Here's something labeled as news, January 17th, 2023. So, while, yes, some of this stuff is from a while ago, April 25th seeming to be the newest thing, that is not 2021. So they're misspeaking there, too. And if they really, at this point, weren't going to do any more news, they should just archive and remove all of that, because it's very old stuff. Very old stuff. I don't know if there's an API here or anything like that where you could scrape OpenCritic to get review scores for games. And since these are all new games, I mean, it's not like you're scraping review scores of old ROMs that you could label the ROMs as, like, this is what OpenCritic says is a good ROM to play, a good game to play. So I don't know if there's really a huge amount of value there. I don't know if there's really a widget that you might want to use if you were running a video game news website, which would kind of make some sense if all of a sudden Video Games Chronicle, Komatsu, even GameDeveloper.com all could just put a widget about a game to get all the information as far as what the publisher is, what the release date is, what the name is, what the score is, obviously. If you didn't have to integrate that into your own backend database, that might save you some work as just a news source site. Of course, most news source sites wouldn't use that widget, and they still would bother to make their own backends to cross-link to other articles about that game. But otherwise, there's just not really a lot of value in these, in Metacritic or OpenCritic. Like, if you don't know anything about a game, then why would you want to buy it? The calendar here might be somewhat useful. I would like to potentially have a calendar like this available to me, but it would only really be useful to me if I was trying to play the newest of the newest games. And this also stops in August, September. Yeah, you have to scroll down to get to December. And I guess there is some slight value here in that it shows you what's in December, but it also seems like either there are absolutely no games that OpenCritic knows about from now till the new year, plus it doesn't know anything past the new year, or this calendar only fills in a few days after the actual date, so it's only a retroactive calendar, which isn't that helpful. And even at this, the flickering between 3 or 4 thumbnails, still probably not the right way to do that as far as making a calendar. It probably would just be easier to have text. I like the pictures, certainly, but you have to also be able to recognize the pictures, and the vast majority of these games I wouldn't recognize. Even something like Mortal Kombat 1 here might be very difficult to recognize as Mortal Kombat 1. And then you can have like private lists, but I don't know what the private list really gets you as far as all of that. Yeah, I don't feel like this is really a wiki where people can submit their information or even their own scores, so it doesn't even really feel like it's that open as a concept. we potentially are getting to the point where something like this should be federated, and different people should have their own personal servers as far as game reviews go, and you should be able to connect your personal server with game reviews to someone else's personal review things. This feels very far away from something like My Anime List, which is what it probably should try and focus on more, is My Anime List style reviews and people getting pedantic and obsessed with it. And then having a want to play or played checkbox on OpenCritic really doesn't make any sense compared to just being able to do that on Steam by putting it on the wish list if you want to play it, and then playing it and having the statistics of your playtime automatically added. And yeah, I would say Metacritic's not much better, maybe a little bit better. Arguably, maybe critics don't need to exist at all. I say as a critic myself, like most people probably don't care about criticisms or critics consumer advice. A lot of critics don't see themselves as people who are supposed to be giving consumer advice in the first place as to whether to play a game or purchase a game. But yeah, a lot of people just are going to buy the game day one or pre-order, and that is just a different type of gamer, certainly, that aren't going to be benefited by critics. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says Google is going to change its App Store billing options post an antitrust suit. Following Epic's antitrust win, the Google Play Store is about to face an upheaval in how it handles payment options and third-party app stores. I don't know if any of this has been confirmed, or if this isn't just a baseless speculative article based on the one fact that they lost that suit. Because the last I had heard, they lost a suit, and then there was a new date set for a meeting in which they were going to discuss what Google has to do to remedy the fact that it's been monopolistic, or it's been found to have been monopolistic. Yeah. When you have a headline that says Google has to do more to change its store. See, Google will pay $700 million in a settlement from this past September, separate from the changes to the Play Store. $70 million is going to go to 36 states and the District of Columbia, which that's just money in the government's coffers. Which, in all fairness, who knows if the government didn't spend more than $70 million between 36 states and the District of Columbia to have this lawsuit go forward. Although they probably didn't, considering it was a lawsuit between Epic Game Store and Google. The states themselves probably didn't spend much of anything. Google also says it intends to fight the court siding with Epic, while confirms it's going to challenge. Confirms it's going to challenge the verdict, says its fights with the Fortnite developer is far from over. Update here, the post has been changed to reflect that the $700 million settlement is unrelated to Google's legal dispute with Epic. So here we have a great example of one of these awful articles and headlines that has basically nothing to do with the reality of the situation. This is a desire by GameDeveloper.com to say that Google is going to change its App Store billing options. There's actually no facts in the middle of this that says that is actually going to happen. Then they're getting distracted and talking about a completely different $700 million suit in this bottom third of the story, which is very typical as far as GameDeveloper.com. You get these 4-sentence groups, not even really paragraphs, of statements that most of which are very dry and lacking in substance, and then they try to build it up to mean something completely different. And there's really just no reason for this. It's just bad journalism. Wait a week. Wait until that meeting happens and there is an actual statement to say, and actual facts to spout as far as what the government tells Google it has to do to change the Play Store, instead of effectively just making up fake news, which in the video game world, this is as close as you're ever going to get to fake news. Hopefully they don't go worse. With just making up these hypothetical scenarios or these wishful articles. And it certainly speaks to a level of ego of the writers at GameDeveloper.com, in that they think that they're that influential when they almost certainly are not that influential, and that their articles would actually influence people or change opinion or change reality in some way. Yeah, the only real problem other than this is just the general fake news problem, in that game developers in particular are probably reading articles from GameDeveloper.com, and so then they are living in this fantasy thought that Google is going to change the app stores at the moment, when it's just not the truth. And that's why you have to kind of know your sources. It's not even check your sources now. It really is. You've got to become deeply familiar with your sources to know where they drop the ball, know where they straight up lie, know where their bias is, because almost everybody is biased. It's more work than any reasonable person should have to do to get a news article, but unfortunately it really has gotten to that point. It probably was that way always, back when it was just newspapers being owned by businesses or rich oil barons or whoever. Maybe we probably have gotten a little bit more intelligence these days, but yeah. It really makes a great argument for something like a PBS video game section, which is an interesting thought. Let me investigate that. I've never considered this, but if there was a publicly funded, or at least publicly mandated, website for video games from something like PBS or BBC, would that potentially be a good source? It seems like that's not existent though. Looking here, the first thing when I type in PBS video games is games for PBS Kids, which makes a lot of sense. And then math games, adventure games, learning and media, PBS Kids YouTube. Let's see. Maybe I needed to type in news. Well, here's where the rub would be, certainly. Seems like under PBS.org NewsHour there's a tag for video games, and we'll look at that. And then there's Last of Us multiplayer game being scrapped, seemingly being the most recent article under the New York Times, not under PBS. So notice here that I search for PBS and they've done some kind of search engine optimization as the New York Times to steal traffic from PBS. But then the next thing you have here is video games violent? Yes, but do they make us violent? Which definitely um, definitely screams that there would be a potential bias. This is an article from 2013 also. And I could see where PBS would be anti-video games just because it eats into their own market share. Then you have a Washington Post, and then New York Times, and NPR article. So maybe National Public Radio might be a source. I don't believe NPR is particularly funded by the government, though. So yeah, it definitely would make some sense if PBS and NPR had a website specifically focusing on that. But yeah, as soon as I get here, I'm getting all kinds of pop-ups, and it doesn't look like there is too much of video game news here. Microsoft heads to court. This is from June 22nd. So they're minimally involved in making articles, and it doesn't seem like you've got like a listicle here as one of the things. So yeah, it seems like there's definitely room for improvement on an NPR/PBS/BBC video games. I didn't search if there was a BBC video games section on their online thing. But then also there's a certain level there where you couldn't make your own PBS publicly funded video game news site. You could make a video game news site and say it's 100% publicly funded, but that would be difficult to fund, certainly. Like the most recent Escapists group of people, when they formed their new organization, I would assume they even if they said that their new organization was going to be 100% fan funded and they weren't going to take sponsorships or ads, very quickly they're going to want to take sponsorships and ads to make more money more consistently. The relatively new guy in charge of YouTube, Neil Mohan, has put out a tweet. It's not particularly video game related, but as the US election season kicks into gear at YouTube, they're connecting with voters with authoritative views and information, more on how we're supporting the 2024 election. So they are clearly phrasing it in kind of a nice way, but they are going to be the YouTube is going to see itself as the decider of fact as far as who has authority as far as news and information, and they are going to try and push people to watch more mainstream, approved by the mainstream sources, which means if you are watching something that is a conspiracy theorist person, whether you actually agree with the conspiracy theorist or not, you're probably going to see you're probably going to see a warning saying what they're saying is not true, or they're going to take down those videos, or they're going to put at least in the recommendation engine that the next video you see after watching more of a conspiracy theorist is going to be something more confirmed, something from perhaps ABC, NBC, CNN, things like that, some of the bigger news sources that get special treatment on YouTube. And it's undoubtedly going to be at least claimed that YouTube will have a left-leaning liberal bias, which in a lot of cases it definitely seems like that is the case. But I guess at a certain level, the only other thing YouTube would likely do is just say we're not doing anything for the elections. It might be interesting to have a website like YouTube and have them just say, you know what, we're just banning all political commentary and talk. We're just gonna lose the views. You go to a different site. That is what the Facebook Threads website was promoting, but noticeably nobody is talking about Facebook Threads at all, when there was a decent chance of that actually replacing Twitter had they made it more accessible and just promoted it more and made it its own separate site that wasn't really connected to a Facebook account or your friends and family. That was a big problem too. But yeah, it is the intent, according to the CEO of YouTube, that they are going to make themselves the chooser of facts and point viewers in different directions. It also implies, certainly, I guess look at the entire blog here, that there is going to be pushes for people who are not political and don't care about politics to also be forced to see political things. Yeah. There's something else I just thought of and then I immediately forgot it. Well, anyways, I hear there is a decent chance that the next election could be a fairly big one, so if you do want to investigate and be involved in that. But yeah, a lot of people just want to opt out and not deal with it. Let's see. Cyan is thrilled to announce that they have launched a Steam storefront for their new Riven game. You can wishlist it today. What's funny is it's going through a Loomly shortcut. I don't know why you use Loomly. So here's the new Riven, a different logo for it. And the screenshots look good, but then the screenshots don't particularly look much different from what the game already exists. And I assume that there is just not really going to be any major changes between the experience of playing Riven in its original form and in this remade form, except for the fact that it's just being called Riven instead of, say, Riven Masterpiece Edition to be in line with the other Masterpiece Editions, or Riven 2024 whenever it comes out, because that is how we're going to have to refer to it. Certainly is that it is just going to be a 3D remake, full 3D, full open environment movement, I assume, remake of Riven. It's weird too that this is a great example of how people who make their store pages control what the tags are. Created by the legendary indie developers Cyan Worlds and based on the award-winning original from 1997 Riven, New Discoveries from the Lost Deny Empire expands its epic narrative beyond both Mist and the original edition of Riven. Encounter an immersive, visually stunning world and discover intricate puzzles that will captivate newcomers as well as reveal new mysteries to uncover for longtime fans. So it does seem like there is new content, and then there will be free movement throughout in the 3D environment, which would make this closer to like the real Mist series of games. But yeah, it is kind of crazy that they would select themselves as calling that as a walking simulator when that is not really what I would describe Ribbon as. But I guess the walking simulator tag, either as a meme or maybe people actually do look for walking simulator games, seems to work in Cyan's mind. But it totally isn't a walking simulator. It really, in my mind, is the exact opposite of a walking simulator, because you're walking around, but you're interacting with a significant amount of puzzles and mechanics and toys, switches, doors, handles. That's just not walking around in a walking simulator. And if you were walking around in a 3D environment and not interacting with anything, but even picking up objects or having to find and look at objects, I'd still call that a hidden object game, a 3D environment hidden object game, before I would call it a walking simulator. The only thing I really think should be called a walking simulator is a game that is 100% devoid of having interactions or gameplay mechanics, really. And it really limits the phrase walking simulator down to a very small group of games. Like even Dear Esther, which is arguably one of the first walking simulators, has a little bit of interaction and things to find, so I'd barely even call it in that category, but I would be lenient enough to say that Talos Principle 2 is definitely not a walking simulator. King of Retail, Scorn, no. The vast majority of these games, if I know them at all, would not really fall into the category of walking simulators. And then, like, that Dragon's Cancer, I wouldn't consider it a walking simulator because I don't think you really walk that much. Weirdly, Death Stranding, a game that has quite a bit of gameplay mechanics, almost is a half walking simulator because it literally is simulating the experience of walking and shipping cargo, but it still has way too much gameplay mechanics and fighting and shooting and interaction to really be under that category or even have that tag. I would love to see Steam retire the tag walking simulator and maybe even make a big event around it and say every year pick one tag and we're going to just remove this tag from our database and retire it. But honestly, they probably shouldn't do that every year. They should just get rid of walking simulator as a tag because it is so nebulous of a descriptor, and it is put on so many games either by the developers or the publishers. In this case, the developer and the publisher would be the same people, or by the fans themselves. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Metacritic has announced its worst video games of 2023. The Lord of the Rings Golem and Crime Boss Rockay City make the list. Let's see if we can click on the article and see it. Well, nope, we don't even need to click on the article. They've got the list here for us. So, yeah, Golem on Metacritic is a 34 out of 40. 34 out of 100, which this definitely highlights the problem with the reviewing system too, because Lord of the Rings Golem, effectively a broken game, and yet they cannot fix the scale so that it would get a 0 where it definitely deserves it. There is potentially an argument that at the end of the year you should take the lowest rated game at something like Metacritic, and if it's a 34, subtract 34 points from all other games, including that game. So it then shifts the scale back down. If you did that at the end of the year too, that would also create a situation where a game from 2024 is just by default getting a higher rating originally, and then the adjusted scale compares apples to apples only after an entire year has passed, and then it becomes a lot more difficult for somebody to say, well, on Metacritic this game from 5 years ago got 100 out of 100, therefore this new game in 2024 is better than that, so it should be getting 105 or 120 points out of 100. The whole scale system really falls apart anyways, because you really should only be comparing games of a similar generation to each other, if not games of a similar genre. So I could see making an overly pedantic system where every action game is being given like an A34 for being an action game, and every fighting game is getting an F34 for being a bad fighting game, but then the two numbers can't really be compared, because if you love fighting games, a 34 in a fighting game may be better than an action game at 34. It's kind of sad to see Flashback 2 taking the number 2 spot, but Flashback is historically relevant, but not really that popular, even the first game. The Grey Hill Incident, I vaguely recall. Quantum Error, I don't recognize at all. Testament, the Order of High Human, I've never heard of. Crime Boss Rocky City at 43 was the one that spent a lot of money for celebrities, and that didn't help them. Hellboy Web of Weird, I would have hoped would have been better received. It feels like there is a niche fandom of Hellboy content, but obviously it's not that big of a fandom, and the video game did not satisfy. Gangs of Shorewood, 48 out of 100. Loop 8 Summer of the Gods, being a visual novel, 49 out of 100. And then Gargoyles Remastered, 49 out of 100, which that's a shame to have a remastered version of an old Sega Gargoyles game. Noticeably though, too, the scale is still very broken in that number 10 and number 9 spots are nearly 50 out of 100 as far as their scores go. The issue here is also going to be how many games does Metacritic really play or have, and I would assume Metacritic has pretty much all of them. Now noticeably, if we look at the 2022 article, which I clicked on accidentally, 2022 was actually fairly better because 6 through 10 were above 49, and there are fairly good scores, relatively speaking. So by Metacritic's scale, games are actually getting worse, not better. And then apparently Metacritic has the highest rated publishers, as another article here, giving Sony Interactive Entertainment the highest score. This would be average scores out of 100 amongst all the games being published, which if you publish more games that are good, that has a decent chance of raising your score up, whereas if you only published one game, it would have to be a lot better. I guess that would generally come down to, on average, is a game good or is a game bad? For the most part, I think on average games are good, but the stinkers do tend to be very large. And then Gematsu has the Riven remake titled Riven New Discoveries from the Lost Deny Empire, with the first details and screenshots. It's on Steam and Good Old Games. We already opened the tab and they don't have any more screenshots to show. See, particularly for Gamatsu, if something like OpenCritic had a widget that would say the same information as far as company profile or publisher profile, game name, a OpenCritic review score, and then you could click on it and get like more information in general, that might help some of these video game websites. But inherently, Gamatsu probably wouldn't use that, because when you click on this, it goes to a separate automatically generated, I imagine, page, or somewhat automatically generated page that has similar information but still keeps you at Gamatsu, where a widget would take you to OpenCritic almost certainly. So you'd almost have to have a widget that allows you to use it, but also directs all the information back in an iframe to your website and lets you get more views, more clicks, more ad impressions. Activision Blizzard QA workers are protesting a, quote, more stressful return to office policy. I don't know if this is a different protest than the ones we've heard about before. This is from, I believe, GameDeveloper.com. Yeah, it looks like it. Why do they need two people to be the authors of this, I wonder? But yeah. Activision Blizzard kicked off 2024 by ending its hybrid work policy and fully embracing return to the office, which return to office RTO, or return to the office RTO, seems to be a buzzword that we're going to hear a lot more in 2024. Particularly for QA workers, I question whether they really need to be at the office or not, but yeah. And almost certainly it is more stressful. Just being around more people, dealing with more personalities, being in an unfamiliar place. You might get more leaks if you're having QA workers working from home, but there's ways to prevent that too. And at a certain level, particularly QA workers are working independently much more than, say, game developers or artists or things. That they're not collaborating as much. So them being remote makes a lot of sense, and also potentially could save money on like snacks in the break room, rooms you have to rent, square footage you have to lease, computers that you have to maintain, electricity bills even. And nobody really gets into that thought either, is that when you're working from home, you're maintaining a computer of some sort, usually at your own expense. You're paying for the bills, the electricity bills, at your own expense. You're maybe offsetting those costs because you're not commuting and you're not buying out lunches and food that you have to buy because you can't just really cook good, nutritious meals and bring them in a brown bag. So you can do a little bit of that, but you're heavily ostracized if you do. But yeah, the work from home concept costs a little bit more than people realize, or saves a little bit more than corporations want to admit. And frankly, if I was a boss, it might give me some coverage to say all my employees are working from home, so I don't have to hover over them. Of course, then I can't really justify my job as well as a boss, because most middle managers have to tell their manager what they did in a day. And yeah, I'd have to figure out something if all my QA testers were working from home. The Godot engine put out this. They're saying prepare to hear a lot more from them, from their blog posts about future community and communication efforts. And don't forget to fill out feedback forms below. So they've got like a whole questionnaire. So it does definitely feel like the Godot engine is trying its very best to just move at rapid speeds to potentially succeed and replace the Unity engine, even though there really isn't a lot of outward hate being spouted still against Unity. I think everybody kind of got it out of their system, and they may still have those feelings, but there's really no reason to repeat yourself on that aspect. I imagine a lot of people have thought and started the process of moving half-finished projects over to the Godot engine, or at least experimenting to see if that would work. Debian Linux, this isn't so video game related, also put out a hot patch for one of their updates because there was a major bug with the file system being corrupted. So they have skipped a entire major, it was like 12.3, and they have just skipped to 12.4 and removed 12.3 once they recognized that there was a major problem. Unfortunately, they didn't recognize it before they released it, and Debian in particular is a Linux known to be very stable, so it's kind of crazy that they wouldn't have caught it before it was released, although maybe it was only released to a beta branch instead of a release branch, and then they caught it. But yeah, I imagine operating systems and computers are only getting more complicated, and room for mistakes are only happening more and more. We have a Video Games Chronicle article here that says the Obsidian co-founder says Bethesda rejected multiple Elder Scrolls spin-off proposals. One was intended to serve the same function as Fallout New Vegas did between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. Which, at a certain level, I don't know if that would have really worked for Skyrim and Elder Scrolls, since every story is usually, like, I think in the Elder Scrolls games, every story is at least several decades, if not hundreds of years apart from each other. And I don't know if there's really a side story that means any difference at all to the players. It would be now, I guess, a good way to make a game that is still set in the same time frame as Skyrim is set, if you wanted to do that, although I just don't see a real reason to do that, and unless you were going to have events take place in different land masses outside of Skyrim at the same time, which could work. Yeah, that would have almost certainly made some sense, that after 3 or 4 years of Skyrim coming out, that they would have taken the land masses and maps that had already been developed for previous Elder Scrolls games and scaled them up and put the same Skyrim tech on just a different land mass. But yeah, Bethesda's terrible. What can we say? Or ZeniMax is terrible as the parent company. Somebody is obviously terrible there, and they were far too eager to sit on and do nothing instead of approving attempts or projects, and it eventually is going to bite them in the butt, and I think we're starting to see the beginning of that. People are not super happy with Starfield, and ZeniMax and Bethesda are putting out boilerplate scripted responses to negative reviews on Steam, which is also not being received well. It feels like it's just robotic AI, potentially AI generated responses, trying to defend the game, Starfield. And yeah, we may just very well see a slow crumbling of the remnants of fandom around Bethesda games in favor of playing things like Baldur's Gate 3, or somebody making something that feels a lot like Skyrim and Elder Scrolls games and just isn't called Elder Scrolls, there's really not that much unique to Elder Scrolls other than Elder Scrolls and the monster types, which you can make skeletons, you can make dragons, you can make ghosts, you can make bears. Like, none of that's copyrightable. In fact, it really is just a matter of how much money they put into it to make a rip-off Skyrim game. Whatever company would do that. Meanwhile, Microsoft may also eventually get off their butts and kick ZeniMax as the parent company to the curb, get rid of all that middle management, and really put Bethesda in a position where they either have to make a new good Elder Scrolls game, or they're going to hand the Elder Scrolls IP over to another company that Microsoft owns, and then we'll see a very different game potentially, but at least we'll see a game. I think the biggest way of signaling that will be the retirement / firing of Todd Howard, which he very possibly might be a major part of the problem. And then, I think this is old news, but Kojima Productions is working on Death Stranding movie with indie powerhouse A24. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's old news. So, then, the games I have from the last stream to look at. This doesn't look like anything. This doesn't look like anything. I don't think I curated any of these games, come to think of it. Well, we're still okay in that situation. Just means I would have to go through these games fairly quickly. It's the fall list cleanup issue. Like, really, it's getting down to the point, if the fall list loads ever, I need to clean it up, because it's pretty much 100% of the time now the fall list is just overloaded and will not load, and I just don't have a way that I know of to fix that. If it does load, I'm going to have to get rid of a significant amount of games on the fall list, which is okay. That's the way to do it, and I don't know if there's any other thing to do there. I think I want to say no to Total Vengeance here, and it almost has enough polish to say yes to it, but not quite. This game is a prologue game, so I'm going to say no to that. Really, the next step, I think I'll give this a chance. It's an old arcade looking game. The next step is to stop putting things on the fall list altogether. Yeah, I think I've got to pull that trigger and just say, I'll make YouTube shorts, and then that'll be it. Things won't be on the fall list, and for at least 95% of the time that'll be perfectly fine. Every now and then something will come back up and get a second YouTube short made by it, but really won't be that big of a deal. Staff runner. I almost want to say yes to this, but the visuals here are not quite as polished as I'd like. Feels like it's kind of an educational musical application. But yeah. I also haven't worked on making any YouTube shorts lately, so I've got a whole bunch of tabs open, and I'll work on that probably after today's stream. Almost said yes to that. Now, I really couldn't go through these games if I hadn't looked at them before, if I had the adult games open. In that scenario, I would have had to just say, whoops, I forgot to look through them after the stream. But yeah, that is a change in just requirements and behavior, and it's is that I'll stream, then I need to look at the games that came out today after the stream to make a more curated list of games to show off on Friday. And that inherently adds a delay, but not too big of a delay, and it's still significantly less of a delay than if I was just making YouTube shorts and then putting them out. And I guess the question here is, particularly on these like visual novels, I'd like to put them on the fall list, but why am I doing that? It's mostly for my own personal interest, just to see what visual novels are good. I feel like particularly when you get into the direction of visual novels, there's a need for a higher amount of feedback between what would be a well-written a well-written visual novel versus a garbage visual novel. I also saw on Reddit they were talking about Iron Mouse, and apparently Iron Mouse, I did not know this, was very, very sick and just effectively trapped in her room from something called CVID, not to be confused with COVID. It's something different. Immune deficiency, something. And she won some kind of award. I've seen some Iron Mouse content. I find her personally a little annoying, too kawaii, too cutesy in her anime VTuber avatar. I'd assume that the anime VTuber avatar is perhaps in part because of her looking sickly at times, although it may just be for privacy and a better way to present it yourself. At a certain level, I imagine a lot of guys, and certainly I've thought of it, but I wouldn't really spend the effort on it. A lot of guys changing their voice and being a VTuber female anime girl might get them more attention. Although, really, in my case, I don't think it would work. I speak too low of a way. That's not a sentence. I speak with too low of a timbre and in fashions using phrases that would probably very quickly reveal that if I was changing my voice and trying to sound like a high-pitched anime VTuber, that it wasn't a female voice originally speaking the words. Also, there is some level of puppetry on those VTubers that just adds more work to it. Like basically having to have an extra control console to puppet the animated character while also potentially playing video games. Let's see. My middle mouse click button is still not really working great. Here's an example of a game where if there was just one enemy in the screenshot, I'd give it a chance. Well, here we go. We have one zombie. So I'll give it a chance. Just because I said that, I probably shot off my mouth by saying that, really. Because after I saw that one zombie, I was like, no, I actually don't want to give it a chance. It's no real surprise, though, that as we go through games, there's still not really a lot of them that are worth mentioning or that relevant. I've seen a slight increase in Christmas games coming out really too close to the... This is a weird collection of asset flips, I think. still just really close to the end of the era, and as such there is not any real major interesting games coming out. So that definitely makes the argument, if there's not really any interesting games coming out. You have a Troll Putin game, we haven't seen one of those in a while, then now really would be the time to run a cleanup. This game Paranoid, looks interesting, but it's mostly negative, unfortunately, which is a shame, because I would say I put it on the fall list. Let's see what the negative reviews go. Horrible, can't even load up the game. First game kept crashing. Okay, it's buggy. So it's just really terrible optimization. Official uncensored patch is currently bugged. So potentially this game, Paranoid, could be an interesting game if it was fixed. Which that gives me an argument to put it on the fall list, although I'm not going to make a YouTube short on it right now. Grandmaster's Revenge almost feels like it's an infinite runner chess game, which is an interesting thought, certainly. It's a different way to make a chess game, and I could see that kind of working. I could also see it having very little connection to chess, and most people who like chess probably rejecting it for that reason. Even some of the more well-received variants on chess I don't think have been well depicted on digital formats. The chess.com, back when I was playing chess.com many years ago, puzzle per day concept, I kind of enjoyed that, and I don't think that there really is something like that on Steam. Notably, chess.com is one of those websites that, while it is a unifocused unitasker, it just gained that popularity when it really would make a lot of sense for, I almost want to say yes to this. I don't think I am going to. I like this 90s PC art style. Yeah, it definitely would make a lot more sense for there to be like one major chess game outside of Tabletop Simulator that was very specialized around chess on Steam. And while there are games like that, I can't really name any of them. And at a certain level, it would almost come down to Steam having to make a special event or sale to promote chess or board games in general, which they have done that in the past, events to promote board games. Otherwise, I don't think most gamers are going to think about playing chess. And there may be a very big split too between the majority of chess fans versus the majority of interactive video games that want video. This is a fairly long experience curating all the games, and it has always been that case, but certainly I'm being reminded of that now. I almost want to say yes to this art style, but no, I don't think it's quite good enough. Then you see a game like this where it all feels like it's just asset flips, so no. Gonna say no to that. And gonna say no to that. And definitely gonna say no to that. I imagine, even though I'm not looking at the adult games for the moment, I imagine it's pretty much still the same old, same old. We probably are seeing higher numbers than we have in the past, and the amount of adult games that were being released were in a very nice number compared to the past. But I imagine there isn't anything particularly Christmassy focused. Maybe one or two Christmas adult games, or that the amount of adult games is going to skyrocket and there's going to be a bunch more, or it's going to shrink down to the point where it's suspicious. And while the amount of games coming out was good, it really didn't take that next step to the quality of adult games being good. Yeah, I'm gonna take this one off. Okay, so that was longer than it should have taken to curate all of that. Yeah, apologies for that. See what the 24-hour peaks say today, or in the last 24 hours. See if we see any games that have really changed. The finals are still staying high. Wallpaper Engine still staying high. War Thunder fairly high, but the overall 100,000 or above numbers aren't, I think, as good as they could have been. And scrolling down all this way isn't really going to tell me much because my eyes are just going to glaze over it. Here you have Skyrim still in the 75th spot, which you really can't argue against Bethesda canceling making other games when people are still playing Skyrim. If we want a new Elder Scrolls game, there really should be a consistent, repeated every month push to say, if you want Elder Scrolls 6, boycott Elder Scrolls 5. Don't play Elder Scrolls 5. Because as long as Bethesda and Microsoft see that they're making the top 100 spot as far as Skyrim, or at least play it offline, but even then they probably are getting metrics from that. It needs to probably be a natural, real boycott of a Skyrim. But yeah, as long as they see people are still playing Skyrim, I think that gives them some level of satisfaction, particularly if you're playing versions that might have a storefront where you can buy horse armor, or eventually buy horse armor or DLC in some other way, or if you're buying new copies of Skyrim for some reason. And yeah, perhaps you should do the same for like Fallout or Fallout 76 for the same reason. Maybe there's an argument to play Fallout New Vegas more instead, but I imagine that really wouldn't change Bethesda's stance as far as hiring a different company, a third-party company, to make a new Fallout New Vegas 2 or something like that. As far as my chart, assuming the numbers are right, everything seems to be still kind of low. Monster Hunter World seems to have popped back up in the list, but yeah, for Wednesday it doesn't seem like there's a big jump in gameplay. Alright, so we do have the Steam Year in a Review, but weirdly it's not directly connected to a sale. as we scroll down here, there's just no sale. So let's review our year on Steam and see how terrible that is. Hope that loads and it doesn't just tell me to sign in. Says this year I've played a lot of new games and unlocked quite a few achievements. Here are a few of your highlights. I played 32 games, which, okay, that's about 3 a month, including the fact that I've spent the last month and a half not playing any games. Yeah, 12, 24, 36, it's almost 3 a month. 27 of those games were new games. The 5 other games, being old games, are questionable. So I would almost subtract the 4 of those 5 games, because really the only game that I actually played, I may have launched some other games, would be Yu-Gi-Oh! So subtract 4 from this to get to 28. Which still, that's a fairly high number. I was apparently 1 short of 500 achievements being unlocked. However, achievements are extremely varied on that case. I got those achievements from 20 games, so 7 of the games, of the new games I played, didn't have achievements, and 129 of those are considered rare achievements, although I don't really know what that means. 54% of the games I played were keyboard and mouse, 46 were with controller. That seems extremely off. I definitely don't feel like half the games I played were keyboard and mouse games, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely is keyboard and mouse. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel took half of my playtime, with 202 sessions being played. Prey took 8% of my playtime, with 19 sessions played. And Lego DC Supervillains took 7% of my playtime, with 24 sessions played. Let's see. How do I compare against other people on Steam? Now, remember that I am technically a YouTube content creator, so I treat this content as a job. Most people playing games are not content creators. But I unlocked 499 achievements. The Steam medium is 16, so I'm way above the scale on that. I played 32 games. The Steam median is 4. Now that's not the average, though. What would be the difference between a median and an average? I used to remember the difference. I think median probably implies more that there would be some people on Steam that played 0, and then there would be some people on Steam that played way more, and they're not averaging out all the people who, say, played 100 games compared to the one person who played 0. Instead, they're just finding the middle number between the biggest number and the smallest number. But yeah, the medium says most people on Steam, according to Medium, only played 4 games. But yeah, that's your average gamer there. And a lot of those average gamers are just playing Call of Duty, maybe NBA 2K, maybe Counter-Strike Go, or something like that. Halo, like 4 games is considerably fewer. My longest streak was 20 days with no break, which, okay, that's probably too much even for me to have no break at all between playing games, where the Steam median there is 5. Now, what the maximum is, who knows, because clearly it knows a maximum here, and it's not mentioning that. As far as new releases, 9% of the games you played were new releases, games released in 2023. I'm surprised it's even that high. 9% of the games the average player on Steam were released in 2023. So I'm actually right in line with that. So that does give me an insight potentially that I could probably play the average number of new games as anybody else, and then also play a whole bunch of old games. Let's see, what you are, what you play. The spider graph shows what kind of games you spent the most time on. I spent the most time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's a roguelike deck builder. Next would be a roguelite, not a roguelike, which potentially is a lot of Legend of Bumbo or even Binding of Isaac. Yu-Gi-Oh! Would be a card battler game, but I also played Lord of the Rings, the adventure card game. Puzzle platformer games, I probably played a couple of those. Psychedelic is a weird tag to use. Walking simulator, I definitely played Dear Esther, which is a walking simulator. But yeah, one would assume that these spider graphs, I'm not sure how you really are supposed to build these, would be using the tags that were most prevalent. So psychedelic would be probably in the number 6 spot. I earned 2 badges and did absolutely none of this other stuff that they want you to do as far as interacting with people. Didn't add any new friends. Adding friends on Steam was kind of pointless because I'm not going to play anybody. Didn't gift any games. Didn't give any community awards, although I thought I would have done that. Didn't share any screenshots. I didn't write reviews. There's no real value in writing reviews on Steam instead of making YouTube videos that might be monetized at some point. Didn't have any discussion points or write guides or subscription or guide subscribers to guides I've read. They didn't contribute anything to the workshop as far as user generated content. No item subscriptions or subscribers on that, which I think the vast majority of people would not have done most of these things, so this entire square is probably unnecessary. Let's see, take a closer look at your top played games. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and yeah, you can see that at some point in April I was probably putting a lot more time in it doing these solo stories, and then it just got less and less and less, which yeah, pretty much just following my enthusiasm with Yu-Gi-Oh! 2. It's a fine game, but it's not something I want to put any extra time into at this point. Prey would have just been a pre-recorded footage game, so I played a whole bunch of it and then played some more of it. This also would have been during the time where either my audio was messed up or the micro stuttering issue of the RAM being overclocked was having a problem. I think the micro stuttering issue of the RAM being overclocked was a problem there. But yeah, pre-recorded game playing this. Although in fairness, some of this probably was playing Prey Moon Crash, the DLC, which I had proved I liked a lot more than the main game. We have a bunch of achievements. And then yeah, pre-recorded footage for Lego DC Supervillains, and you can just kind of see how the coverage goes. It's just like you play one game, then you play the next game. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, same issue there. Dicey Dungeons. I wouldn't have assumed I was playing Dicey Dungeons in January, but in January. And I guess the little gold frame here probably are the rare achievements. I was fairly close to getting all the achievements in this game, but the last few are just not really worth going. So yeah, this breaks it down more as far as in January it was also Yu-Gi-Oh! And No More Heroes and Dicey Dungeons. Then it was Bumbo and Prey and Yu-Gi-Oh! And let's see, the Swapper and the Descendant. Then it was Prey some more, and honestly I don't know how that really would have happened. I probably just played this, then started playing Prey, and then it was DC Supervillains. Then here we have Indiana Jones Emperor's Tomb, Flight of the Amazon Queen, Marvel Snap we looked at for like a second, and then Magic the Gathering Arena I looked at for a second but didn't make any footage. And then Lord of the Rings adventure card game. And then I would have started Shadow of the Tomb Raider at that point and continued to play Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and then several other games. This year in review actually works fairly nicely for me. I probably should have made a special video just around this. Trine 2, Missed 5 End of Ages, Polybridge, Little Nightmares. I don't think I covered that because I don't have the sequel. Guardians of the Galaxy, the Telltale series, and Marvel Snap. And Disney Epic Mickey. Then Jones on Fire, Never Alone, Californium, Fury, Dear Esther Landmark Edition, the Disney Afternoon Collection, and 2 more, which I don't think I can actually click on the 2 more there. Fury and Res Infinite. And then halfway through October, that's when I pretty much started working on my Smart On Air sign and stopped playing any games. And hopefully we don't have a year in review next year where I haven't played any games at all, but who knows what'll happen. So all these games were played with the controller, and then I had a longer streak between January 22nd and February 11th, which is playing all these games. Then I guess you can see a timeline view here to just break it down better. This is really just repeated information, but whatever. Nothing is really going to surprise me too much here, except for if the thumbnail looks different. Played the Blob. Played Parking Slide. Tried to play Castle of Illusion, it's too broken, can't play it. Launched Time Clickers. Okay. So that's pretty much the year in review. Maybe I'll share that to my Twitter. That's pretty much as I can do with it. That could, as a content creator, bring out some more attention. I think this view is probably more efficient to show all the games you played. And really it just is a example of the success you can potentially have as far as if your goal is just to play video games. If you put your focus in on it, that may be the only success you can potentially have though as a content creator. Take note that that list of games is 100% opposite of what a successful Iron Mouse or other kind of streamer, personality-based VTuber or video game streamer would be. Captain Sparkle's kind of an example of that too, is that almost all the really successful game streamers are playing like either the same game over and over again, in the case of Captain Sparkle's and Minecraft, for years and years and years, or they're playing the absolute most popular brand new game like Lethal Company, which I believe Captain Sparkles is also doing that. They're not trying to play old games. They're not trying to play a diversity of games. They're not trying to change what their content is and potentially lose an audience there, unless it is a brand new super popular game. So it would be a different amount of time you'd have to commit to new games like Lethal Company, and a different amount of money you'd have to commit to buying games brand new and jumping on the games as soon as possible. I would also say successful streamers in general have groups of other successful streamers that they collaborate with. So there's a lot of collaboration, and getting in on that group is almost impossible, or getting in a group like that I don't think my macros are in the right situation, so it thinks we're looking at new games on Steam, but we're going to be looking at video game news or video game chronicles stories. So to try and fix that and not just have the auto blur happen, I'm gonna go this way, and then we'll go back here. Alright, so video game news. Sony says that the PS5 has hit 50 million sales just 1 week slower than the PS4 did, which that definitely comes off as being manipulated information. The console reached a new milestone after 3 years on the market. I would like to hear somebody's personal opinions as far as whether or not they feel the PlayStation 5 has done a good job as far as satisfying its audience of people who bought the PS5 when it first launched 3 years ago, because I don't really feel like there's been that many good games. You're getting Last of Us remakes and Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 and maybe a God of War that's exclusive to the PS5, but probably not. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. Alright, so we're going to go through these stories backwards just because of the weirdness of how my plugins are working. So we had already talked about the Max Payne voice actor James McAfee passing away. This is, once again, I guess worth mentioning. Died of cancer at age 65. Baldur's Gate 3 isn't going to be on the Xbox Game Pass, says Larian. We've talked about that. Not that it's not going to be on Xbox consoles, though. It is on Xbox consoles. It's just not going to be part of Game Pass. Good Old Games updated its winter sale with another free game. This may be over. December 21st. You still have a little bit of time. One more day to get that free game. And then we talked about the Obsidian co-founder saying Bethesda rejected multiple Elder Scrolls spin-off proposals. There definitely are parts in the engine. I think it's called the Gamebryo engine. Maybe that I'm wrong about that. The Skyrim engine, where you could definitely spin off that technology and make a smaller, more simple game. Even if you're just doing a April Fool's Day game where you only play as a shopkeeper and you're just selling things, or you only play as a blacksmith and you're just smelting things. The real thing would be certainly to spin off the entirety of the engine and have something like Skyrim in just a completely different land mass, or give a character limited amount of skills, maybe make it more story focused and linear, where you're playing just as a mage and you're expected that you're going to go from point A to point B to point C, and it's not going to be so open world, and you're not going to have as many skills, and you're not going to have to grind to level up skills because of it. Like there's a lot you could have done over the years with the foundation of Skyrim, certainly. Ubisoft's first $70 game this month, Avatar, is already being heavily discounted. Retailers have knocked $20 off of it, or £25 off the new release ahead of Christmas. I think in part what I've heard from at least one YouTuber is that this Pandora game, while maybe satisfactory to the deep lore fans of the Avatar series, is not really going to be satisfactory if you barely know Avatar or only have a passing love for the Avatar series. And I certainly would be in the category of barely knowing Avatar. I haven't watched any of the movies. Rocksteady urges fans to be aware of disappointing Suicide Squad spoilers. Quote, "We hope everyone can play the game and feel each moment of the narrative for themselves," which, using the phrase disappointing, is perhaps a slip of the tongue not to make. Uh, the full quote here, I guess, was probably, "It is very disappointing to see details being shared ahead of the game's release, so we can only urge you to try and avoid spoilers where you can, and please try not to impact the enjoyment of other players by posting spoilers," which effectively they're saying we're disappointed in the spoilers, or talking down to the fandom. I imagine the game will be disappointing now, and not because I've seen spoilers, but just because I've seen what they've had to announce so far, and I am definitely considering the timing of the Suicide Squad being released compared to when the most recent Suicide Squad movie was released. It feels like this game has been delayed. The content that has been announced in it looks uninteresting. So I guess I definitely could be surprised, but I'm not really expecting to be. An Insomniac hacker has released more than 1.3 million stolen files, including unannounced game info. The hacking group threatened to publish the files a week ago if they weren't paid. There was a law that they put in effect in the United States as far as not paying these extortion things, although in this case they may have been asking for money from Sony in Japan, where the law wouldn't have been the case. And even in the US, if that law really did go into force, I think people would probably still want to pay. Although it may very well be a case that Sony in particular just does not care. They've been hacked before, although they probably should care more than ever. December's PlayStation Plus game catalog and classic titles are available to claim. They include GTA 5, Strangers in Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin, MotoGP 23, classic Mega Man, and Disney titles. The full list is here at Video Games Chronicle if you want to check it out. Let's see. Dead Space co-creator Glenn Schofield, I assume is how you pronounce that, is teasing his next project. Schofield recently left Striking Distance Studios after the Callisto Protocol misfired, I guess is a kind way of phrasing it. I'd say failed. So inherently, this is someone who is using the fact that he was the co-creator, or at least he is claiming to be the co-creator of Dead Space, now either because journalists are describing him that way, or because he wants to be described that way, to try for a second time to make a spiritual successor to Dead Space. When the Callisto Protocol really didn't have anything that was praisable in it. It's not like the story was good. It's not like the gameplay mechanics were good or great. Maybe they were all good, but they weren't great. It's not like the setting was great. It's not like the enemies were great. It's not like the music was great. So whatever Glenn Schofield brought to the table in Dead Space 1, I assume, was not enough for him alone to make a spiritual successor. Meanwhile, on the other hand, this is really just hurting the fans of Dead Space, because we're kind of unlikely to see a Dead Space 2 remake unless they just once again want to screw over Glenn Schofield and rush to make a Dead Space 2 remake and release it right at the same time that Glenn Schofield's next project is released, which maybe they will do that. They did it once, why not do it again? Maybe EA is just that petty, and maybe this is Glenn Schofield's secret master plan all along, is he's going to release low effort bad games to force EA to release remakes of Dead Space 1 and 2, and then potentially even a reboot of Dead Space 3. But yeah, how many times can you form a new company? This is a former Sledgehammer Games and Visual Games general manager left His most recent studio Striking Distance earlier this year after its debut game, The Callisto Protocol, failed to meet expectations. Schofield, who is also a professional artist, revealed this week that he's been working on a new game-related project behind the scenes. Quote, although I've taken some time off, I've been extremely busy and not just drawing. Something in games that's new and exciting. Can't wait to share after the new year. So this is a tease for a tease. Having both trained in fine arts and business, Schofield started in a video game career as an art director on licensed games based on The Simpsons, Ren and Stimpy, and Home Alone in the early 1990s, which also highlights that he's a fairly old person for the video game industry that doesn't really tolerate old people. He later joined Crystal Dynamics and led development of Gex and Legacy of Kain franchises, another franchise that has been forgotten a time, and it has a cult fandom that would love to see Legacy of Kain reboots. It's unlikely to happen. However, Schofield would make his name at EA Redwood Studios, later renamed Visceral Games, initially working on Lord of the Rings, Godfather, and 007 games, before co-creating the critically acclaimed Dead Space franchise. Schofield left for new Activision Call of Duty studio Sledgehammer Games in 2009, where he co-directed. He's co-doing everything, or co-doing quite a lot here. Modern Warfare 3 and directed Advanced Warfare. He founded Krafton subsidiary Striking Distance in 2019 with the goal of crafting an original narrative experience in the PUBG universe, although the project evolved over time into a sci-fi survival horror game that was no longer tied to the franchise. The Callisto Protocol received mixed reviews when it was released last December, a month before EA released a critically acclaimed Dead Space remake. In January, an analyst claimed Krafton had targeted 5 million sales for the Callisto Protocol, but that followed a slow start. It could struggle to reach 2 million by the end of 2023. Schofield confirmed his bittersweet departure of Striking Distance in September, with Krafton representative also said that he had decided to pursue new opportunities and would be leaving the company voluntarily. I'm sure it was heavily suggested he leave the company. Of course, there is the myth of the individual artist, particularly in game development, and we can't really put all of the success or half of the success on the Dead Space co-creator for Dead Space any more than we should put all the failure of the Callisto Protocol on Glenn Schofield. Like, there obviously were other people working under him on that project. There was Krafton as a publisher funding the development of that project. It's very possible that many other people had fingers in that pie and made it a bad pie, as the Callisto Protocol eventually revealed itself to be. And if anything, that makes a great argument for just better crediting in news sources in particular, but just better crediting in general. Again, if there was a widget when you hovered over the name of a game like Dead Space and it just brought up a link to a page or a pop-up with the credits of everybody that worked on that game, it would be more informative, to say the least. It might be overwhelming, but at least it would be informative. We may very well, if we could make those easy connections, find that people working on the original Dead Space have gone on to work on other projects and make better games because of that, instead of all of the fortune and glory and all the blame being put on just the big name that is in charge of a project. Yeah, we already talked about the Metacritic worst video games in 2023. World of Warcraft 2024 roadmap confirms that the Wars Within launch window is early autumn it'll arrive by early autumn next year. I really question if there are a significant number of people, relatively speaking, still playing World of Warcraft. And then the Epic's next free game is seemingly leaked. DNF Duel will reportedly replace Destiny 2 Legacy Collection. And then Suicide Squad has been delayed again, but just on the Epic Game Store. It'll debut on other platforms in February before hitting Epic Game Store in March. And then Sega offers new details on Jet Set Radio, Streets of Rage, and classic reboots. Which, yeah. Suppose you could read this article in Video Games Chronicles if you really care. It looks like they've given you basically one sentence for each of these games. Which, since these are all reboots of games you should already know, one sentence really isn't going to change much. Alright, and that's going to bring us to the Gematsu articles. So I'm going to just jump over here. Let's see, Armored Core 6 Fires of the Rubicon has been ranked, is getting its ranked matchmaking update launching on December 19th. Maybe I should have made a YouTube short on that, but whatever. A visual novel called Mediterranea Inferno is coming to the PS4 and 5, the Xbox Series and Switch on March 5th of 2024. Which this is definitely a different art style. Quite a different art style there. A Super Dungeon Maker version 1.1 update is now available. It adds new character skins, dungeon themes, enemies, and more. Never heard of this game. Looks like it might be Switch focused, looking at the button prompts. Let's see, it is on Steam though, so it's on the following list. You know what I could try and do is maybe through SteamDB I could find a list of all the games that are on my fall list, do that, or just a list of major games and then make some considerations there and remove things from the fall list to get it back down to a more manageable number. It's really just crazy though that the fall list is just totally overwhelmed. The number's too high. They should have just stopped me at some point and said, you know what, we're only going to show you the first 5,000 games, or the first 2,000 games, or the first 400 games. Tales of Iron Brit Fur Forest update is now available. New quest, bosses, weapons, armor, and more. This is also on Steam. And this also is something that could just move over to my wishlist. Of course, I'm making the same mistake, aren't I? In that at some point the wishlist may just get too big and then it will stop loading, and that's a bigger issue. The game Chimera's title has been changed to Star Rupture, which that is an interesting argument as far as whether I should make a new YouTube short just because the name has changed. It's going to be such a rare case that it happens, I probably should. Particularly since you're trying to have search engine optimization, so when people are searching a name, they get the YouTube shorts that I make. Saneland Uniride gameplay trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. There really is very little articles today from Gematsu. The Cub launches January 19th for the PS4 and 5, Switch and PC, and then the Xbox Series and Xbox One versions have been postponed. It is also a case where, what was I going to say? Yeah, just not a lot of games coming out. Sneeze Hinka Sentinel Girls 2 has been announced for PC. feel like this may be a game that is a sequel to a game that came out fairly recently, and that they're kind of releasing sequels a little too fast. I'd say the art looks a little rough too. Riven remake titled Riven New Discoveries. It's on Steam. Definitely put that on the follow list. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is Game Informer's issue 362 cover story. Gamatsu tends not to really talk about Game Informer as a magazine that is really just GameStop advertising. Perhaps they are making the exception here because you have a Japanese game taking the cover story, which I guess is a very large rarity. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth character spotlight and trailers are available on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. And then the Famitsu review scores for issue 1829 are available. And just take note of the difference there, that Famitsu has been going on about 6 times as long as far as its number of issues, compared to Game Informer, which is only up to 300s. That being said, 300s is actually a fairly long amount of time if you're only releasing a issue every month, whereas Famitsu is releasing an issue, I think, on a weekly basis. They're giving Baldur's Gate 3 36 out of 40, 9s across the board. Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising 34 out of 40, still a decent number. Magician's Dead Force of the Soul 28 out of 40, a particularly low number. And then Metro Quester a 30 out of 40. 2 of these games also I don't really recognize, and this kind of highlights a very different experience here, where Baldur's Gate 3 is fairly late to the party in Japan for the PS5. Akatsuki enters into capital and business alliance agreements with Sony and Koei Tecmo. 9.87% of the shares issued to Sony and 7.97% to Koei Tecmo. I've never heard of this Akatsuki company though, so they may not have made anything. Matsu going into kind of large details here as far as the arrangement goes. It's a very Japanese thing for 3 companies to make such an interconnected agreement without one of the companies vying to acquire the other company. And at the moment, with those percentage shares, it would be kind of hard for Sony to buy all of Akatsuki, or even a controlling share of Akatsuki. They eventually could do it. Whereas Western companies would have just wanted to acquire a company outright. Okay. So theoretically, then we have some GameDeveloper.com news, but remember they've changed their website, so I don't have any of those open, so we'll just see if anything has really been updated here. Not really much, and I wonder if it's almost a case where the big news is coming up on these big blocks, and then the old news gets put on the lower blocks. I think that is exactly the case. So, yeah. I think that's exactly how this is going. So there's a couple stories here. Otherwise, I was just going to mention James McAfee's passing again from the 18th. Okay, I think I've figured this out. So, Sabotage's retro RPG, Sea of Stars, has hit 4 million players, which that sounds like a fairly large amount for a game I don't recognize at all. Let me see what happens when I click Sea of Stars. It takes me to a Twitter page. And that's not very helpful. And let's see, how do you even get to a link to Sea of Stars? You can't. Wow. So game developer not doing a really good job of having a link to the game, or a Steam page, or even a link tree of different places, which is what gamers would want to be able to click on and see. Apparently future class members call the Game Awards, quote, silence a collective disappointment. So wait, no. Future class members call the Game Awards silence, possession of the silence. I hate the asterisk after an S to show possession, a quote collective disappointment. The Game Awards future class members feel that this year's ceremony failed them and made them question the program's real intentions. Quote, we were supposed to be in this group that can lead the game industry to a better tomorrow, but as soon as our names are written, we're forgotten about, says the game developer Younes Rabi. The Game Awards in general caught collective criticism, I would say, from developers and players alike during its ceremony earlier this month. In a report from Wired, members of its future class, which must be some project that they announced, I don't even remember it, still find its inability to speak on real-world issues particularly damning. Made up of young developers billed as the future of the game industry, future class members signed an open letter calling for the awards to make public statements in solidarity with Palestinians under attack in Gaza. I knew that this was going to be one of the reasons why the Game Awards was so quick to just give away awards and not have anybody take the stage and make speeches. I knew that this was going to be one of the things that the Game Awards in general, or Jeff Keighley personally, or Jeff Keighley professionally did not want to have happen. And in fairness, I agree with him. I really do. Like, I don't think political speeches, whether they're considered very controversial or only a little controversial, should be at video game awards. But I do think that there is a way to pre-record the event, which it should just be pre-recorded by a couple of hours, or an hour. 7-second delay even would be fine. Really, but just do a little bit of a 7-second delay and say anything political whatsoever is going to be dropped anyways. And that's really the way all awards should be done. The Will Smith smack should have really just been a 7-second delay remove, and it just wasn't there. And then they should have probably gone to commercial at that point and moved on as if it hadn't even happened. It doesn't really matter which side anybody is on when you start to make political speeches, because one person is going to say one thing and other people are going to say another thing, and it just has nothing to do with video games. There's already too much that happens at the Game Awards this year in particular that really didn't have to do with video games, or was too focused on, like, Kojima's producing a video game instead of giving equal time to multiple video games. But yeah, I assume that this may have been one of the cases. There's an update here. In response to Wire's piece, several future class members spoke up, calling the meeting with Keighley really productive. Apparently there was some meeting that happened and hoped future award shows would improve from those discussions. One member noted that the article was reflective of the problem. I guess this is a quote of somebody stuttering, but not the solutions we're already trying to make happen. I'm cautiously optimistic that demands will be listened to. End quote. Another said that the information given to the outlet was outdated and didn't fully represent the meeting that took place. We together to bring up solutions. Man, whoever is speaking here is either misspeaking terribly or whoever is writing terribly. They added, not to point fingers and blame, is another quote. There is a real annoyance, I imagine, even amongst other game developers who might support Palestine and their Palestinian message word for word. There almost certainly is a real annoyance from established video game companies being told what to say or what to promote from this future class, who are effectively, I imagine, not successful and not prestigious. See if we can find the full list here of the 2023 future class. Yeah, undoubtedly there's going to be some younger college kids that tend to have more of a liberal bias, and then generally when they create these kinds of quote-unquote future class groups, they want to spread diversity like crazy. So yeah, let's see if we can find even a single white guy, although you're gonna have to hover over people. Like, here's potentially a white woman if she calls herself a woman. Same would be here, potentially here. I'd say this is probably an Indian guy. Let's see. This is definitely way more diverse than the current group of people. Alright, we found one white guy. Way more diverse than the group of people that are actually working in video game companies that exist now. Maybe that's a problem with the video game companies division. Interesting, this one has a black and white headshot that is just black and white. And a white guy. Alright, so we found 2 or 3 of them, and you are running about 60 to 70% of all of the employees either being female or otherwise considered a minority. So, yeah. It is extremely, extremely diverse. And notably, none of these people look old enough to have actually even worked, really, in the game industry for that long. This may be the breakdown of game developers in the future, but it certainly does not represent and does not speak for game developers at the time. So even if the Game Awards were going to make a statement and allow speeches so people could individually make statements, the future class really shouldn't be the people making that statement. It's coming from voices that are going to be dismissed easily. They don't have authority, they don't have credibility amongst their peers. So it would make a lot more sense if Kojima stood up there and said a pro-Palestinian speech, or something even general that says, I wish for peace all throughout the world, which is something he could probably make a speech on. And frankly, Jeff Keighley probably could trust Kojima to make that speech on behalf of all game developers at the beginning, that might have worked fairly well as kind of, we're going to take a neutral stance, but we are pro peace, whatever peace really looks like, throughout the world. And then there would have been a little bit of less criticism. Of course, after doing that, Jeff Keighley can't then effectively silence people by not having them come up on stage and give speeches, which is pretty obvious what he did. And it certainly speaks to how much Jeff Keighley and the Video Game Awards in general cares about free speech, or people being allowed to have their say in general, and how much the Game Awards might be very pro censorship, and most gamers are very sore on the subject of censorship. We tend not to like it, so we should easily not like what is effectively censorship happening at Game Awards also. But yeah, I definitely feel like there was a better middle ground where you could say, we're going to have Kojima come up and make a statement about peace. We may even have him talk about like World War II and Japan and America being enemies at the time, and then now we are great allies, and speaking from his knowledge from that, although I wouldn't be surprised if Kojima really wouldn't want to say some of that. A lot of Japanese older people are very sore about World War II still. But yeah, if he had said, we're going to have Kojima or Jeff Keighley himself make a speech about peace at the beginning, we want that to be the official message of the Video Game Awards. Everybody else is going to be allowed to give their acceptance speech and thank their friends and family and co-workers. But if they make even like a Free Palestine type message, we're going to drop that 7 seconds on a 7-second delay, because we want our message to be concise and connected there. That probably would have been a better compromise. And here's the big news that seemingly just happened, and it's perhaps not super surprising. We had heard rumors that Bobby Kotick was going to go be a partial owner of West Ham United, a football club in the UK. And it really didn't seem like there was a huge reason why, after the Activision Blizzard merger was completed, that he would stay around. Perhaps he's leaving a little bit earlier, but I guess he just wants to end the 2023 right and leave. So Bobby Kotick is leaving Activision Blizzard next week. Kotick's tenure at Activision Blizzard saw it become one of the video game's biggest publishers, along with it and himself being the subject of numerous recent controversies. I'm not sure I heard too many controversies around Bobby Kotick in particular. I maybe heard that he was maybe a bit of a jerk, but I don't think he actually sexually harassed anybody, from what I recall. But yeah, this does finally kick in the teeth my thought that the Activision Blizzard merger with Microsoft, or acquisition by Microsoft, let's be accurate here, was just corporate protectionism of Bobby Kotick to the extreme that they actually wanted to keep Bobby Kotick because he knows a lot of rich people, and he rubs elbows with a bunch of rich people and successful people, and he knows politicians and would have been potentially still a good lobbyist or connection, and you may still have all those connections, but yeah, keeping him employed day to day, keeping him in a named position, obviously is out the window now. Is this really going to change Activision Blizzard? If it is, it's going to be probably for the better, because you probably just didn't need a middle manager for no reason. See, Bobby Kotick has been the long-running CEO. He'll depart on December 29th. He'll step down from his position and a direct successor won't be appointed. Instead, the executives that report directly to him, like Mike Ybarra and Rob Kostic, will fall under the purview of Microsoft Game Content and Studios President Matt Booty. So they are eliminating one middle management position at that point, whereas Bobby Kotick would have been the CEO before. He's basically middle management in Microsoft. This change comes a handful of months after Microsoft folded Kotick and ZeniMax leadership into Xbox's own leadership team. However, his exit was confirmed months prior. Back in October, Phil Spencer said Kotick would stay with the Call of Duty publisher until year's end. So apparently this had already been announced and I just missed it. Along with Kotick, CCO Lulu Messervy is expected to depart at the end of January. Blizzard King VP Humnan Sakninin will exit next week as well, and other unnamed Activision Blizzard executives will be gone by March. So it does kind of feel like they're cleaning house. They're just doing it in a very slow and nice way. Kotick became Activision's CEO all the way back in 1991, and during the time he acquired Vivendi, King, Major League Gaming. In 2008, they acquired the World of Warcraft creator Blizzard Entertainment, turning it into the company as it exists today, which is to say turning it into a shambles of what it once was. Although in fairness, they did have some years of success there as Activision Blizzard King. It was really just the continued focus on Call of Duty and Activision, and all the funds and all the focus being published in Call of Duty, and less funds and less focus being put on any of the Blizzard properties or Vivendi King properties. In 2021, Kotick was accused of sexual harassment and enabling a culture of toxicity within the larger company, and Blizzard specifically for years. So he was personally accused. I didn't recall that. He later called the allegations, quote, inaccurate, and claimed a specific report on him ignored Activision Blizzard's sweep of changes, including a zero-tolerance policy on harassment. As Microsoft was gearing up to acquire Activision Blizzard months after Spencer called these allegations disturbing, questions were raised about what to do with Kotick. This is just a link to GameDeveloper.com's article, I'm sure. As it turned out, unjust firing would have cost $15 million the company likely didn't want to spend. For the most part, Kotick minded his own business during the acquisition process, and when he did make himself known, it was to berate regulators and Sony for trying to block the deal, which is interesting and probably the right response. Interesting they start with the parentheses here and then don't end with the parentheses. So yeah, we may finally be done with Bobby Kotick, as it were. Yeah, we may never hear anything more from Bobby Kotick or about Bobby Kotick. Does this instantly fix everything with Activision Blizzard? No. Does Microsoft still have a lot of work on its hands after even getting rid of middle management and just streamlining Activision Blizzard? Yes. Is there still a need to bring back talent or bring in new talent for Activision Blizzard properties to be better quality and better received? Yes. So it really is just the first big step towards taking things like Overwatch and Hearthstone and Diablo and improving those products or their sequels to those products in a way that fandom might actually come back. Anyways, on that note, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's a link down below in the description box. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.